On a scorching September afternoon in 1889, the stagecoach's wheels stirred up clouds of dust as it approached what should have been the thriving town of Silver Creek, Wyoming. Inside, clutching a faded carpetbag and a handful of increasingly worn letters, sat Clara Whitfield, 23 years old, and about to discover that sometimes life's greatest gambles lead to the most unexpected destinations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year had been cruel to Clara. The textile mill, where she'd worked 60 hours a week in Boston, had shuttered in March, turning out its workers with 2 weeks' pay and empty promises. Her landlady, Mrs. Pemberton, had given her exactly 10 days to settle her arrears or find new accommodation that simply didn't exist in a city flooded with unemployed factory girls. With her parents dead from consumption 3 years prior, and her only living relative, a cousin in Chicago, already struggling to feed his own family, Clara had turned to the back pages of the Boston Herald, where matrimonial advertisements promised new beginnings in the territories. Prosperous. Merchant seeks refined Eastern lady for matrimony. Silver Creek, Wyoming. Comfortable living assured. Reply to Mr. Marcus Henderson. The letters that followed had painted a picture of a bustling frontier town, complete with 2 churches, a schoolhouse, a general store, and Henderson's own establishment. A successful trading post that catered to miners, ranchers, and settlers passing through. He'd written of neat wooden sidewalks, gas street lamps, and weekly socials at the community hall. Most importantly, he'd enclosed a bank draft for her passage west, along with promises of a wedding dress waiting at Miller's Dry Goods upon her arrival. Clara had sold her few possessions: her mother's silver hand mirror, a cameo brooch, and 3 books of poetry, to supplement her meager savings and purchase appropriate traveling clothes. The journey had taken 6 grueling days by rail to Cheyenne, followed by 2 days on a bone-rattling stagecoach through increasingly desolate landscape. Her fellow passengers, a gruff cattle rancher named Daniels and a well-dressed woman in black, who claimed to be en route to Denver, had disembarked at various stops, leaving Clara alone for the final stretch to Silver Creek. Now, as the coach crested the final hill, Clara smoothed her travel-stained navy dress and tucked a stray lock of auburn hair beneath her modest bonnet. Her heart raced with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. In less than an hour, she would meet the man she'd agreed to marry sight unseen, in a town that would become her home. She had memorized Henderson's description: 42 years of age, brown hair silvered at the temples, average height, clean-shaven, with a commanding presence befitting a successful businessman. "Silver Creek," announced the driver, Thomas Murphy, his voice oddly devoid of its usual cheerful banter. "End of the line, miss." Clara's stomach tightened as she peered through the coach window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Silver Creek wasn't bustling, it was abandoned. The main street stretched before her like a graveyard's pathway, lined with weathered buildings whose windows stared back like hollow eyes. Paint peeled in long strips from false-fronted structures, revealing grey wood beneath. Tumbleweeds danced across the empty thoroughfare, their movement the only signs of life in a town that should have been thriving. "There must be some mistake," Clara whispered, pressing closer to the window. "This can't be Silver Creek." Murphy climbed down from his perch and opened the coach door, his weathered face sympathetic but resigned. "I'm afraid it is, miss. Silver Creek's been dying slow for nearly 2 years now. Mill closed when the silver veins played out. Most folks moved on to greener pastures." Clara accepted his hand as she stepped down, her legs trembling from both the journey and shock. But Mr. Henderson's letters, he said it was prosperous, growing. Henderson. Murphy removed his hat, running gnarled fingers through thinning grey hair. "Mining Marcus Henderson?" "Merchant Marcus Henderson," Clara corrected. hoping to cling desperately to the distinction. "He owns a trading post here. We've been corresponding." "For months." Murphy's expression grew more troubled. "Miss, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Marcus Henderson died of a fever last winter. His place shuttered 6 months back. Somebody's been writing to you under false pretenses." The ground tilted beneath Clara's feet. The bank draft, the detailed letters, the wedding dress supposedly waiting at Miller's Dry Goods, all lies. She found herself gripping the coach door for support as the full scope of the deception crashed over her like a wave. But I sold everything. I have nowhere." The words emerged as barely a whisper. Murphy's weathered hand landed gently on her shoulder. "I'm truly sorry, miss. It's a cruel thing what someone's done to you. Though I will say you're not the first young lady I've delivered here under similar circumstances. There's been 4 others this year alone, all following the same story." Clara's knees nearly buckled. 4 others? "Afraid so. All got letters from Marcus Henderson. All promised the same thing, though most had the sense to turn right around and catch the next coach out." "And where?" Clara's voice cracked with desperation. "I've spent every penny I had getting here. Everything I owned in the world is in this bag." She gestured helplessly to her carpet bag, which contained 1 change of clothes, her comb and brush, a small Bible, and exactly 17 cents in coins. The magnitude of her situation began to settle in her mind like sediment after a storm. Stranded in a ghost town, hundreds of miles from anyone she knew, with no money and no immediate way to leave. Murphy glanced at the empty street, then back at Clara. "Well, it's not completely empty, miss. Sam Briggs runs the general store. It's more of a trading post now. And old Mrs. Henderson, Marcus's widow, keeps the boarding house open for the occasional traveller. And there's—" He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the far end of town, where a plume of dark smoke rose against the cloudless sky. "There's what?" Clara prompted. "The blacksmith. Jack Morrison. He's been here longer than anyone. Keeps the forge running, though there's precious little work these days. Mostly repairs for the few ranchers still working the outlying spreads." Clara followed Murphy's gaze. The smoke rose steadily, a sign of human presence in this desolate place. Somewhere, at least, someone was working, creating, maintaining some semblance of life in Silver Creek's dying shell. "I should get to the boarding house," she decided, trying to inject strength into her voice she didn't feel. "Perhaps Mrs. Henderson could suggest options." Murphy nodded, hefting her carpet bag and trunk from the coach. "It's just down there, past the old bank. Can't miss it. Only building with window boxes, though the flowers have gone to seed." As they walked through Silver Creek's deserted Main Street, Clara absorbed details that Henderson's letters had never mentioned. The wooden sidewalks were splintered and warped, weeds growing through the gaps. Several storefronts stood empty, their doors hanging askew on rusted hinges. The promised gas street lamps were nowhere to be seen. Instead, the occasional oil lamp bracket jutted from walls, many missing their fixtures entirely. But Silver Creek hadn't always been this desolate. Clara could see the bones of prosperity in the architectural details. Ornate cornices on the bank building, elegant ironwork on the hotel balconies, wide streets designed to accommodate heavy wagon traffic. This had been a real town once, a place where people had invested dreams and built futures. Now it felt like a memorial to abandoned ambitions. They passed what must once have been Miller's Dry Goods, its windows papered over from the inside, a faded "for sale" sign barely legible on the door. Clara's heart sank further as she realized the promised wedding dress was as fictional as everything else in Henderson's letters. "Here we are," Murphy announced, stopping before a 2-story wooden building that looked marginally better maintained than its neighbors. The window boxes he'd mentioned still held the dried remnants of marigolds, and the porch had been recently swept. Smoke rose from the chimney, another encouraging sign. Before they could knock, the door swung open, revealing a plump woman in her 50s with graying hair pinned in a severe bun. Her dress was practical but clean, her apron stained with what appeared to be flour. "Well now," she said, her voice carrying both kindness and resignation. "Let me guess. Another bride for my late husband?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You knew?" "Suspected. Young ladies don't often arrive in silver. Greek these days, and when they do—" She gestured helplessly. "I'm Ida Henderson. Please come in. You'll want to wash the dust off, and I've got coffee on." Murphy tipped his hat. "I'll leave you ladies to talk. Miss—" He paused, realizing he'd never learned Clara's name. "Whitfield," Clara supplied. "Clara Whitfield. Miss Whitfield, I'm sorry for your troubles. Coach returns through Thursday if you can arrange passage." He set her bags on the porch and departed. The rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves, a lonely sound in the empty street. Ida Henderson led Clara into a parlor that spoke of better times. Heavy furniture that had seen recent polishing, lace, curtains that were clean if not quite white, and a piano in the corner with sheet music open to Beautiful Dreamer. The room felt lived in, cared for, despite its surroundings. "Sit down, dear. I'll get that coffee." Ida bustled toward what Clara assumed was the kitchen. "I've had this conversation too many times these past months." Clara sank into a horsehair chair, the reality of her situation washing over her in waves. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so terribly sorry for your loss. I had no idea your husband had passed. The letters I received—" Ida returned with a tray bearing 2 cups of coffee and a plate of sugar cookies. "Someone's been using Marcus's name to lure young women west." Her voice held a mixture of anger and resignation. "It's cruel what they're doing, targeting girls. Desperate enough to believe in promises of prosperity out here." "I sold everything," Clara admitted, accepting a cup of coffee with trembling hands. "I had no other options." "That makes 5 of you this year," Ida said gently, settling into the chair opposite. 2 turned right around on the next coach. 1 married Jeremiah Watts. He owns a cattle spread about 20 miles north. And 1, she faltered, her expression troubled. "1 what?" Clara prompted, gave up hope, walked into the Little Bear River with stones in her pockets. Ida's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Sweet girl, couldn't have been older than 20. A chill ran through Clara despite the warm coffee. That's horrible. The frontier's hard on women with no family, no money, no prospects. Ida agreed. "But you seem made of stronger stuff than some. What'll you do?" Clara stared into her coffee cup, watching the dark liquid swirl. "I don't know. I literally have 17 cents to my name. No way to get home, even if I had a home to return to." "Well, you can stay here tonight at least. No charge." Ida's kindness was almost too much to bear. "Tomorrow we'll figure something out. Perhaps Sam Briggs needs help at the store, though he can barely afford to pay himself most months." As if summoned by the mention of his name, the front door creaked open. "Ida, you got company. Saw the coach come through." "In here, Sam," Ida called. A thin man in his 60s entered the parlor, his sparse hair combed carefully over a mostly bald pate. His clothes were neat but worn, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who'd survived in frontier commerce for decades. "This is Miss Clara Whitfield," Ida introduced. "Another of Marcus's brides. This is Sam Briggs, our storekeeper." Sam's expression immediately shifted to sympathy. "Ah, miss, I'm right, sorry. It's a terrible thing, what someone's doing with poor Marcus's name." "Mr. Briggs," Clara acknowledged with a nod. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you might occasionally need help at your store." Sam grimaced. "I wish I could say yes, miss. But the truth is, I'm barely keeping the doors open myself. Most folks pay in trade these days, and with so few people left in town." He spread his hands helplessly. The walls seemed to close in as Clara contemplated her dwindling options. No job at the store, no way to afford coach fare, and winter approaching in a few months when even these bare survival options might disappear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "There is Morrison," Sam said suddenly, glancing between the two women. "Jack." Ida's eyebrows rose. "What about him?" "Well, he never did take on an apprentice after young Billy Thompson moved to Cheyenne. Been managing the forge all by himself for 2 years now. Could use some help, especially with winter coming. Ranchers bringing in their horses for new shoes, equipment needing repair before the cold sets in." "A blacksmith's apprentice?" Clara couldn't hide the surprise in her voice. "Might not be conventional work for a lady," Sam admitted. "But then, again, Silver Creek doesn't offer many conventional opportunities these days. And Jack's a decent man. Lost his own wife to pneumonia 3 years back. Tends to keep to himself, but he's fair in his dealings." The smoke she'd seen earlier suddenly took on new significance. The blacksmith, Jack Morrison, representing perhaps the only productive work left in Silver Creek. "He'd hire a woman?" Clara asked, trying to imagine herself working at a forge. "Jack's practical above all else," Ida said thoughtfully. "If you can do the work, he wouldn't care if you were a 3-legged mule." Clara managed a weak smile. High praise indeed. "The forge is at the far end of Main Street," Sam continued. "You can't miss it. Follow the smoke. Fair warning, though, Jack's not much for conversation, answers in grunts mostly, but he pays fair wages for fair work. An apprentice to a blacksmith." It wasn't what Clara had imagined when she'd boarded that train in Boston, but it was tangible work, honest wages, and perhaps a reason to stay in Silver Creek long enough to save money for eventual passage somewhere, anywhere, with actual prospects. "I'll walk down there tomorrow," she decided, the decision bringing a small measure of relief. "Present myself professionally and see if the position might be available." "That's the spirit," Ida approved. "Now let me show you to your room. You'll want to rest before tackling our resident blacksmith. And Miss Whitfield." "Yes?" "Wear something you don't mind getting dirty." Jack's particular about testing potential workers right from the start. That evening, Clara sat by the window in the small but clean room Ida had provided, watching the sun set over Silver Creek's empty streets. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, that steady plume of smoke continued to rise from the blacksmith's forge, a beacon of activity in a dying town. She opened her carpet bag and withdrew the few letters Marcus Henderson had supposedly written, reading them one last time by lamplight. The promises felt hollow now, but the handwriting was elegant, the paper good quality. Someone had taken considerable effort to craft this deception. As she folded the letters away, Clara caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman staring back at her looked older than her 23 years, worn by travel and defeat, but there was something else there too. A set to her jaw that hadn't been present that morning. Determination, perhaps, or simply stubborn survival, instinct. Tomorrow she would walk to the far end of town and present herself to a reclusive blacksmith, hoping for work she'd never imagined doing. It wasn't the fresh start she'd planned when she'd sold everything she owned, but it was a start nonetheless. In the distance, a wolf howled, its call echoing across the empty plains. Clara pulled the thin curtains closed and began unpacking her few belongings. Silver Creek might be dying, but it hadn't died yet. And neither had she. Dawn came too early in Silver Creek, announced by the lonesome crow of a rooster somewhere in the distance and light that seemed to struggle through the dusty windows. Clara woke with a start, momentarily disoriented before. The events of yesterday crashed back into her consciousness. She was in a ghost town, practically penniless, about to seek employment she'd never considered. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a practical brown wool that wouldn't show dirt easily. Over it, she tied a serviceable apron she'd found hanging in the room's small closet. Ida had mentioned breakfast at 6, and the smell of bacon drifting up from the kitchen suggested the time had come. Downstairs, she found Ida bustling about, the kitchen and 3 other guests seated at the large wooden table, 2 men in dusty work clothes and an elderly woman Clara hadn't met the previous evening. "Morning, dear," Ida called cheerfully. "Sleep well?" "Well enough, thank you." Clara took the offered seat, nodding politely to the other guests. "This is Miss Whitfield," Ida announced to the table, "joining us for a spell. Miss Whitfield, meet Tom Bradley and his son James. They work the Bradley Ranch about 15 miles east. And Mrs. Carter, she's visiting her nephew, who's been laid up with a broken leg." The introductions were brief but polite. As Clara ate her eggs and bacon, she listened to the morning conversation, learning more about Silver Creek's current state than all of yesterday's discussions combined. "Simmons' place went up for auction last week," Tom Bradley mentioned, buttering his biscuit. "Didn't get a single bid." "Third farm this month?" James added glumly. "At this rate, whole territory's going to be empty by Christmas." "Oh, it won't be that bad," Mrs. Carter protested, though she sounded more hopeful than convinced. "The railroad's still talking about extending the line west. That bring business back?" Tom Bradley snorted. "Railroad's been talking for 2 years now. Meanwhile, the bank's foreclosing on half the county." Clara's stomach tightened. If established ranchers were struggling, what hope did she have of finding sustainable work here? After breakfast, she gathered her courage and set out for the blacksmith's forge. The morning air carried a chill that hinted at the coming autumn, and Silver Creek looked even more desolate in daylight than it had the previous evening. She counted as she walked, 12 buildings with any signs of life out of what must have been 40 or 50 structures along Main Street. The sound of metal striking metal grew louder as she approached the far end of town. The blacksmith's shop was unmistakable, not just from the smoke and noise, but from the collection of broken wagons, rusty farm equipment, and skeletal remains of what might once have been a water pump scattered around the exterior. Clara hesitated at the threshold. Through the open door, she could see a figure silhouetted against the glowing forge. Massive shoulders, arms thick with muscle, face obscured by heat shimmer and smoke. The rhythmic hammering stopped, and the figure turned toward the doorway. "We're closed," came a gruff voice. "Come back at noon if you need something mended." "Actually, I'm not here as a customer," Clara called back, stepping closer despite her nervousness. "Mr. Briggs suggested you might be looking for an apprentice." The hammering resumed, even louder than before. Clara waited, uncertainty growing. With each strike of metal on metal, finally, the noise ceased again. "Can't afford an apprentice," the voice declared flatly. "I understood the position would pay wages," Clara ventured, moving close enough now to see the man more clearly. Jack. Morrison was exactly what she might have expected of a frontier blacksmith, yet somehow more imposing. Easily 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the doorframe, his dark hair was cropped short, and his beard was thick with grey streaks. His arms were corded with muscle and marked with old burns, his hands massive and scarred. But it was his eyes that gave Clara pause, the clearest blue she'd ever seen, set in a face that looked carved from the same iron he worked. Those eyes studied her now with frank assessment. "You're the one who came in on yesterday's coach, another of Henderson's brides." It wasn't a question, but Clara nodded anyway. Figured as much. Jack turned back to his work, selecting a piece of iron from a pile and examining it critically. "Still can't afford an apprentice." "Perhaps we could discuss terms," Clara pressed, trying to infuse her voice with confidence she didn't feel. "I'm a quick learner, quite organized and—" "Lady," Jack interrupted, setting the iron back down with deliberate care. "You want to know why I can't afford an apprentice? Because I got 3 paying jobs this month. 1 horseshoe repair, 1 broken plow tip, and 1 wagon wheel rim that needs reinforcing. That's barely enough to keep my own belly full. Most folks pay in eggs or vegetables these days, when they pay at all. The bluntness of his response stung, but Clara persisted. I could help with organization, inventory, perhaps drum up new business. There is no new business, Jack stated flatly. Town's dying, been dying for 2 years. In 6 months, the only people left will be me, Ida, Sam, and maybe a handful of ranchers too stubborn to admit defeat. Clara's heart sank, but something in his dismissive tone sparked a flicker of anger. Then why do you stay? The question seemed to catch Jack off guard. He stared at her for a long moment before answering. Got my reasons. None of which include training apprentices who'll be gone on the next coach out. I'm not looking to leave, Clara said firmly. I came here to start a new life, and I intend to do exactly that. In a dead town with no prospects? Jack's laugh was harsh. You'd be the first. Someone has to be, Clara shot back, surprising herself with her vehemence. Unless everyone just gives up and abandons everything they've built. Jack's eyes narrowed, studying her with what might have been renewed interest. You don't know anything about blacksmithing. I don't know anything about a lot of things, Clara admitted. But I learned quickly I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm here. That's more than most can say. For a moment, she thought she'd reached him. Then Jack picked up his hammer and turned back to the forge. Try the general store, he said dismissively. Or maybe Ida needs help at the boarding house. I already spoke with Mr. Briggs. He can't afford help either. And I'm not looking for charity from Mrs. Henderson. Then you're in a tough spot, Jack replied, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. Clara stood there for a moment, feeling the heat from the forge on her face and the cold reality of her situation settling deeper into her bones. This was it, then. No work at the store, no work at the forge. With 17 cents to her name and winter approaching, her options were narrowing to the point of desperation. She turned to leave, defeat heavy in her chest, when she spotted something that made her pause. On a cluttered workbench near the door lay a ledger, its pages covered with cramped handwriting and crossed-out numbers. Even from a distance, Clara could see it was a mess. Calculations scattered across pages without system, due payments noted in margins, work orders mixed with supply inventories. Without thinking, she moved closer to examine it. Jack's record-keeping was a disaster. What are you doing? Jack's voice held a warning edge. You're accounting, Clara said absently, turning a page. It's chaotic. How do you know what you're owed, or what supplies you need to order? I manage. Do you? Clara traced a finger down a column of numbers. Because according to this, the Weatherby Ranch owes you for 3 separate jobs, totaling, she calculated quickly, $17. But you've got it marked as $11 in one place and $22 in another. Jack set down his hammer with more force than necessary. Miss Whitfield, Clara corrected automatically, still studying the ledger. And your supply inventory is 6 months out of date. You've got coal listed at prices that must be from last winter. She became aware that Jack had moved closer and was now staring at her with an unreadable expression. You can make sense of that mess? He asked finally. With time, yes. It's not so different from keeping household accounts, just on a larger scale. Clara closed the ledger and faced him directly. I could organize this properly, create a system for tracking jobs and payments, make sure you're actually collecting what you're owed. For wages, I can't afford to pay. For room and board, Clara countered quickly. And maybe a small percentage of any outstanding debts I manage to collect. No upfront cost to you. Jack studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he shook his head. No. The single word hit Clara like a physical blow. No, No woman's gonna last here, especially not some Eastern lady who never held a hammer in her life. You'll quit inside a week once you realize what the work actually involves. I've worked 60-hour weeks in a factory, Clara protested. I'm not afraid of hard labor. Factory work and forge work are different animals, Jack said grimly. You want my advice? Take what money you got left, beg a loan from Ida if you need to, and catch the next coach out. Find yourself a husband in some proper town with actual prospects. The condescension in his voice ignited Clara's temper. You don't know anything about me, Mr. Morrison. You don't know what I've survived, what I'm capable of, or what I'm willing to do to build a life for myself. And you don't know anything about Silver Creek or what it takes to survive here, Jack shot back. I've seen plenty of folks like you come through, full of hope and determination. They all ended up broken or gone inside 6 months. Then give me 6 months, Clara challenged. Let me prove myself. If I can't handle the work, I'll leave. No argument, no excuses. And when you get hurt because you don't know what you're doing, when a piece of hot iron catches your dress, or you can't handle a panicked horse, who's responsible then? I am, Clara said firmly. My choices, my consequences. Jack ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely frustrated. You're not listening. There's no money here, no future. You're asking me to train you for a profession that's already dying in a town that's already dead. Then why are you still here? Clara demanded again. If it's all so hopeless, why haven't you left? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Jack's jaw tightened, and for a moment Clara thought he might finally give her a real answer. Instead, he turned abruptly back to his forge. Conversation's over, Miss Whitfield. I got work to do. The dismissal was final, absolute. Clara stood there for another moment, watching Jack's powerful shoulders as he worked, the steady rhythm of his hammer ringing through the shop. Then, with as much dignity as she could muster, she turned and walked out. The sun was higher now, the morning warmth doing little to combat the chill settling into Clara's bones. She walked slowly back toward Ida's boarding house, her mind racing through increasingly desperate possibilities. No work at the store, no work at the forge. What was left? Washing clothes, cooking meals. Even those traditional women's jobs required customers or employers who could afford to pay. She was so caught up in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice the commotion ahead. Voices, angry ones, drifted from the direction of Briggs' general store. As she drew closer, she could make out Sam Briggs standing on his porch, facing 2 men on horseback. I told you I don't have it, Sam was saying, his voice tight with stress. August was a bad month. September's not looking any better. That's the 3rd month running, Briggs, one of the riders replied. Clara could see now that they wore sheriffs' badges, though they didn't look like lawmen she'd known back east. These men had a harder edge, their clothes expensive, but their expressions cold. Mr. Walters is getting impatient. Tell Walters I'll have something by the end of the week, Sam pleaded. The Bradley Ranch is supposed to settle their account. Promises don't pay bills, the second rider interrupted. Mr. Walters sent us to collect, not to negotiate. Clara quickened her pace, arriving just as one of the men dismounted and stepped onto the store's porch. Up close, she could see the silver dollars stitched onto his leather vest. Markers of kills, if the stories she'd heard about frontier justice were true. Sam, she called out, trying to inject casual friendliness into her voice. I was just coming to discuss that job we talked about yesterday. All 3 men turned to stare at her. Sam's confusion was evident, but he was quick enough to play along. Ah, Miss Whitfield, yes, we were going to finalize the details of your position. What position? The first rider demanded, his eyes narrowing as they swept over Clara. I've hired Miss Whitfield as my bookkeeper, Sam improvised smoothly. She'll be helping me organize accounts, collect outstanding debts, should help with our cash flow situation considerably. The rider's expression didn't soften. And you couldn't afford to pay your dues, but suddenly you can afford to hire help. She's working for a percentage of collections, Clara interjected, stepping forward with more confidence than she felt. No collections, no payment. It's in my interest to make. Sure, Mr. Briggs can meet his obligations? The two men exchanged glances. Finally, the mounted one spoke. Fine. You've got until Friday, Briggs, and if Miss Whitfield here can't work miracles with your books, well. He let the threat hang unfinished. We'll be back. They rode off without another word, leaving Clara and Sam standing on the porch in uncomfortable silence. Miss Whitfield, Sam said carefully, I appreciate the assist, but I can't actually afford to hire you. What you just told them about percentage of collections was true, Clara finished, if you're agreeable to the arrangement. Sam stared at her. But yesterday you said you couldn't afford wages. Today I'm proposing a different arrangement. Clara straightened her shoulders. I'll organize your books, contact people who owe you money, create a system for tracking payments. In return, I'll take a percentage of what I manage to collect. And if you can't collect anything, then we're no worse off than before, Clara pointed out. But based on what I saw at the blacksmith shop, I suspect you're owed more than you realize. People just need to be reminded of their obligations. Sam rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Those men work for Randall Walters, owns the bank in Laramie. I owe him for a loan I took out to restock last year, back when business was better. How much? $300, plus interest. Clara's mind reeled at the sum, but she kept her expression neutral. And how much are you owed in outstanding accounts? I'm not sure exactly. Maybe 100, 200? Honestly, Miss Whitfield, my record-keeping's not what it should be. Then we start there, Clara decided. With your permission, I'd like to spend the afternoon reviewing your accounts. By tomorrow, I'll have a clear picture of what's owed and a plan for collection. Sam studied her for a long moment. Why are you doing this? After what I told you yesterday about not being able to afford help. Clara thought of Jack Morrison's dismissal, of her dwindling options, of the steady stream of bad news from every direction, because sometimes we have to create our own opportunities, Mr. Briggs, and because I suspect Silver Creek has more life left in it than people think. All right then, Sam said slowly, but those men weren't bluffing. If I can't pay Walters by Friday, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Clara said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. For now, let's see exactly where we stand. As they entered the general store, Clara caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the street. Jack Morrison stood outside his forge, apparently taking a break from his work. Even at this distance, she could see he was looking in their direction. Let him look, she thought with a surge of defiance. She might not have won over the stubborn blacksmith, but she'd found another way to stay in Silver Creek, another way to prove that she wasn't just another desperate woman waiting to be rescued. The interior of Briggs' general store was a maze of shelves and barrels, every surface covered with merchandise that seemed more dusty than useful. But Clara's trained eye immediately spotted the potential beneath the chaos. Organization would help, better display would help, and most importantly, collecting on past due accounts would help. Where do you keep your ledgers, Mr. Briggs? She asked, rolling up her sleeves. As Sam led her to a cluttered office space behind the counter, Clara felt a spark of purpose she hadn't experienced since leaving Boston. This wasn't the future she'd imagined when she'd sold everything she owned to come west, but it was something, a beginning. And in a town where most people seemed resigned to endings, a beginning might be exactly what Silver Creek needed. Outside, the shadow of Jack Morrison's forge continued to stretch across the empty street, a reminder of the rejection that had brought her to this moment. But Clara was beginning to realize that sometimes rejection opens doors that acceptance never could. Tomorrow, she would face the challenge of turning Sam's chaotic records into a functioning accounting system. The day after that, she would begin The delicate task of collecting debts from people who had little to give. And somewhere in the distance loomed Friday and the return of Randall Walter's men. But for now, she had work to do, purpose to serve, and for the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, a reason to believe that her journey west hadn't been a complete disaster after all. Clara spent the remainder of Tuesday buried in Sam Briggs' ledgers, her fingers stained with ink, and her mind reeling from the sheer disorder of his accounting system. As afternoon light filtered through the store's dusty windows, she began to see not just chaos, but potential. "Mr. Briggs," she called, emerging from the back office with a list in her hand. "According to my calculations, you're owed at least $270 in outstanding accounts." Sam looked up from restocking shelves with canned goods. "That much? Are you certain?" "Some of these debts go back 18 months, Clara confirmed, ticking off items on her list. "The Weatherby Ranch alone owes you $47 for supplies. The Miller Farm, $32, and there's a significant amount from various miners who apparently took goods on credit last summer." "The miners are long gone," Sam said grimly, "headed to Colorado when the silver played out." "But the ranchers aren't," Clara countered, "and some of these accounts are for necessities, animal feed, tools, seed. They'll need to settle before winter, or they won't survive the season." Sam ran his hands through his thinning hair. "You don't understand how things work out here, Miss Whitfield. People don't have cash money. They pay when they can, trade when they must." "I'm beginning to understand that," Clara admitted. "But Mr. Walter's men aren't interested in trade goods. You need actual currency by Friday." The bell above the shop Dar jangled, interrupting their conversation. Clara looked up to see a woman enter, middle-aged, wearing a faded calico dress and a worried expression. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson," Sam greeted her. "What can I do for you?" "I need sugar, Mr. Briggs, and coffee if you've got any left, but—" She hesitated, glancing at Clara with obvious embarrassment. "I won't have money until my husband sells the fall cattle next month." Sam's shoulders sagged slightly. This was clearly a familiar conversation. "Of course, Mrs. Patterson, just add it to your account." "Actually," Clara interjected, moving forward with what she hoped was a reassuring smile, "Mrs. Patterson, I'm helping Mr. Briggs organize his accounts. According to my records, your family has substantial credit here from last year's grain delivery." The woman's eyes widened. "We do?" Clara consulted her notes quickly. "Yes. Your husband delivered 12 bushels of wheat last October, valued at $18. You've only used about half that credit, so you're welcome to take what you need." "Today, I thought we'd settled that account," Mrs. Patterson said uncertainly. "Not according to the books," Clara said diplomatically. "Sometimes these things get confused in the shuffle, especially during busy seasons," Sam caught on quickly. "That's right. Clara here's been straightening out all my records. Turns out I've been keeping some of you folks from using credit you've already earned." Mrs. Patterson's relief was palpable. "Well, that's wonderful news. Thank you so much, Miss Whitfield," Clara supplied. "I'm new in town, helping Mr. Briggs modernize his record-keeping." As Mrs. Patterson gathered her items, Clara noticed movement outside the store window. Jack Morrison was passing by, leading a horse with a bandaged leg. He glanced through the window, his expression unreadable, then continued toward the forge. After Mrs. Patterson left with her goods and a considerably lighter spirit, Sam turned to Clara with newfound respect. "How did you know about that wheat delivery? I don't even remember it." "I didn't," Clara admitted, "but I found several entries for grain deliveries with payment amounts that didn't match up with purchase records. Simple mathematics suggested that someone was owed credit. I took a calculated risk." "You lied?" "I found a way to help someone while maintaining the integrity of your business," Clara corrected gently. "Mrs. Patterson's family clearly trades regularly with you. Keeping them happy and fed means they'll continue to be customers when they do have money. Sam studied her for a long moment, then broke into a slow grin. You know, Miss Whitfield, I think you might just be what this place needs. 30 years I've been running this store, always struggling to balance kindness with survival. You managed, both in 5 minutes. That evening, as Clara worked late organizing supply inventories by lamplight, she heard a commotion outside. Voices, multiple voices, raised in what sounded like an argument. She set down her pen and moved to the window, peering through the dusty glass. A small crowd had gathered in the street near the forge. In the fading light, she could make out Jack Morrison standing face to face with 2 men, his posture defensive, but not aggressive. One of the men was gesturing wildly, his voice carrying on the still air. Promised 2 weeks ago, can't keep running a ranch with broken equipment. And I told you, Garrett, your plow needs parts I don't have. Jack's voice responded, calm, but firm. Nearest suppliers in Cheyenne. Takes time to order, time to ship, time I don't have. The angry man, Garrett, shouted back. Planting season coming, and you're the only blacksmith left in 100 miles. Clara watched as more townspeople gathered, drawn by the argument. She recognized Tom Bradley from the boarding house, and several others she'd seen around Silver Creek. Jack's right, Tom Bradley interjected, stepping forward. We're all dealing with the same problem. No supplies, no money to order what we need. Then find a solution. Garrett wheeled on him. Because I'll be damned if I lose another season to broken equipment while Morrison here sits on his hands. The situation was escalating. Clara could see tension in Jack's shoulders, the way his hands had closed into fists. She made a decision. Grabbing her shawl, she stepped out of the store and approached the gathering. Excuse me, Mr. Garrett, is it? The arguing men turned to stare at her. Up close, Garrett looked even more frustrated than he'd sounded. His weathered face creased with worry. Who are you? He demanded. Clara Whitfield. I'm helping Mr. Briggs organize supplier relationships. The lie came smoothly. I couldn't help overhearing your equipment situation. Lady, this isn't your concern. Actually, it might be, Clara interrupted, her mind racing. Mr. Morrison, what specific parts does Mr. Garrett's plow require? Jack's expression was suspicious, but he answered. 2 replacement tines, reinforcement plates for the share, and a new coupling mechanism. Standard items, but suppliers require payment up front these days, Clara finished. Yes, Mr. Briggs mentioned similar issues with his inventory. However, I've been working on a possible solution. She had absolutely no solution, but the attention of the entire group was now focused on her. What kind of solution? Tom Bradley asked skeptically. A cooperative ordering system, Clara said, the idea forming as she spoke. If we pooled orders from multiple businesses and ranches, we could meet minimum purchase requirements that many suppliers require. Mr. Briggs has connections with several wholesale companies. Combined orders might qualify for better pricing and payment terms. The crowd murmured thoughtfully. Jack's eyes narrowed, studying her intently. And who's going to organize all this? Garrett demanded. Who's going to trust someone else with their money? I am, said a voice from behind them. Ada Henderson approached, having apparently been listening from her porch. Miss Whitfield's been working miracles with the town's books. If she says she can make this work, I believe her. Ida, you don't even know her, Garrett protested. I know enough, Ida replied firmly. More to the point, what other choice do we have? We can keep arguing and blaming each other while our businesses fail, or we can try something new. Sam Briggs had joined the gathering now, and he nodded slowly. The wholesale houses do prefer bulk orders. If we could combine needs. I'd need to survey everyone's requirements, Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Create consolidated orders, negotiate terms with suppliers. It would take time to establish, but how much time? Jack interrupted. His voice was different now, not dismissive, but curious. And what makes you think you can succeed where the rest of us have failed? Because sometimes an outsider sees possibilities that familiarity overlooks, Clara answered honestly. I don't know all the history, all the failed attempts, all the reasons things can't work. I only see what needs to be done, and whether it's possible to do it. The silence that followed felt weighted with possibility. Finally, Garrett spoke. All right, I'm willing to listen, but if this is just talk, it's not, Clara said firmly. Give me 3 days. By Friday, I'll present a detailed plan for cooperative purchasing. If it's not viable, you'll know for certain. If it is... She let the sentence hang. One by one, the townspeople began to disperse, discussing the proposal in small groups. Soon only Clara, Jack and Ida remained in the street. That was quite a performance, Jack said quietly. It wasn't a performance, Clara replied. It was problem-solving, and if you'd been willing to collaborate instead of refusing help, we might have reached this solution days ago. Jack's eyebrows rose at her directness. Careful, Miss Whitfield. You're making promises you might not be able to keep. I'm making promises I intend to keep, Clara corrected. Unlike some people who refuse to even try. Ida chuckled softly. I like her, Jack. She's got a spine. She's got something, Jack agreed, though his tone was unreadable. Question is whether it's sense or stubbornness. In my experience, Ida said, glancing between them, the difference between those two is usually just a matter of perspective. Jack picked up the lead rope of the horse he'd been tending. As he turned to leave, he paused, looking back at Clara. That cooperative purchasing idea, he said slowly. It's not terrible. If you can actually make it work. I can, Clara said confidently. Then I might have misjudged you, Miss Whitfield. It was the closest thing to an apology she was likely to get from the taciturn Blacksmith, and Clara felt a small surge of satisfaction. Time will tell, Mr. Morrison. He nodded once, almost a sign of respect, then led the limping horse back toward his forge. That night, Clara worked by lamplight in her room at the boarding house, surrounded by ledgers, notes, and rough calculations. The cooperative purchasing plan needed to be more than just a good idea. It needed to be bulletproof by Friday. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. Come in. Ida entered carrying a tray with tea and fresh biscuits. Thought you might need sustenance. You've been working yourself fierce these past days. Thank you. Clara accepted the tea gratefully. I hope I haven't promised more than I can deliver. You did what needed doing, Ida said, settling into the room's small chair. This town's been dying by inches. Everyone is too proud or too scared to try something different. You gave us a reason to hope. Even Mr. Morrison seemed intrigued. Clara admitted. Ida smiled knowingly. Jack's a complicated man, lost his wife Anna to pneumonia the winter after the silver mines closed. She was pregnant with their first child. Clara's teacup paused halfway to her lips. She hadn't known about the baby. He blames himself, Ida continued softly. Thinks if he'd taken her back east like she wanted, if they'd left Silver Creek when the town started failing. He stayed because of the work, because people needed a blacksmith. Now he can't leave because it feels like abandoning her memory. The insight struck Clara unexpectedly. That's why he's so resistant to change, to hope. Hope means risk. Risk means the possibility of more loss. Ida nodded. But you've got him thinking differently. I saw it tonight. I simply suggested cooperation instead of isolation, which is exactly what this town's needed for 2 years. Sometimes it takes a stranger to point out what's obvious to everyone who's been staring at it too long. The next 3 days blurred, together in a whirlwind of activity. Clara visited every functioning business and ranch within riding distance, documenting needs, negotiating terms, and building a framework for collective purchasing. Her evenings were spent consolidating information, calculating freight costs, and drafting letters to suppliers in Cheyenne and Denver. Thursday afternoon found her outside the forge again, this time with a legitimate reason. "Mr. Morrison," she called, "I've identified several blacksmithing supplies that could be included in the cooperative order. Would you consider reviewing my list?" Jack looked up from his work, surprise flickering across his features before his expression settled into its customary reserve. "Come in." The forge was exactly as she remembered. Hot, cluttered, yet somehow organized according to its own logic. Jack wiped his hands on a leather apron and accepted the papers she offered. As he read, Clara found herself studying him more openly than she'd been able to before. In profile, his features were strong, but not harsh. When he concentrated, as he was now, a small furrow appeared between his brows. "These prices are considerably lower than I've been paying," he said finally. "Bulk ordering allows for better negotiation," Clara explained. "The supplier is willing to extend 30-day payment terms for orders over $200. And you think we can reach that threshold?" "I know we can. Between your needs, Mr. Briggs's inventory requirements, and the various ranch equipment repairs, we're looking at roughly $600 in combined purchases." Jack set the papers aside and faced her directly. "Miss Whitfield, why are you doing this? You don't owe this town anything. You could take what money you have and leave like everyone else." Clara considered the question carefully. "Because sometimes running away just means you carry your problems with you. Sometimes you need to plant roots, even in difficult soil." Silver Creek's not just difficult soil. It's poisoned earth for most folks. "Maybe," Clara conceded. "But I think there's still life here, and I think you believe that too, or you would have left already." They stared at each other for a long moment, something shifting in the air between them. Finally, Jack spoke. "I'll support your cooperative plan. And Miss Whitfield?" "Yes?" "Next week, after this crisis with Briggs and Walters is settled, come back. I might have that apprentice position available after all." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "What changed your mind?" "You did," Jack said simply. "Turns out stubbornness and sense aren't mutually exclusive, especially not out here." Friday morning dawned with unprecedented activity on Silver Creek's main street. Word of Clara's cooperative plan had spread, and many of the outlying ranchers and farmers had come to town for the presentation she'd promised. Clara stood on the porch of Briggs' General Store, facing a crowd larger than any she'd seen since arriving in Silver Creek. Her carefully prepared notes rustled in her hand as she waited for the last few stragglers to join the assembly. Somewhere in the crowd, she caught sight of Jack Morrison. Standing slightly apart from the others, his arms crossed but his expression attentive. Near the front, Sam Briggs fidgeted nervously, knowing that his survival might depend on whether Clara could deliver on her promises. And there, at the edge of the gathering, she noticed a familiar face. Randall Walters' debt collectors had arrived early, their presence a stark reminder of what was at stake. Clara took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I know many of you traveled considerable distances, and I promise not to waste your time. As some of you know, I'm Clara Whitfield, and over the past week, I've been working with Mr. Briggs and others to develop a solution to problems we all share." She held up her prepared documents, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm here to present a plan that could transform not just how we do business, but how we survive as a community. It's called cooperative purchasing, and if you'll bear with me, I believe you'll see its potential to change everything." As she began to outline the details, Clara noticed Jack's subtle nod of approval, Ida's encouraging smile, and even Sam's cautious optimism. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, she felt the distinctive electricity of possibility in the air. The ghost town, it seemed, was ready to come back to life. October brought the first frost to Silver Creek, silvering the abandoned buildings, and highlighting the stark beauty of the dying town. Clara stood at her window early Monday morning, watching Jack Morrison prepare his forge for the day. The familiar plume of smoke rose steadily, a promise of warmth and purpose in the crisp air. Today would be her first day as Jack's apprentice, a title she still couldn't quite believe was hers. The cooperative purchasing presentation had been a success, raising enough funds to satisfy Walter's men while establishing a foundation for ongoing community collaboration. More surprisingly, it had earned her not just respect, but genuine opportunity. She dressed in the sturdy work clothes Ida had helped her acquire: canvas trousers, a heavy cotton shirt, and sturdy boots. Looking at herself in the small mirror, Clara hardly recognized the prim Boston woman who had arrived just weeks ago. Jack was already at work when she arrived at the forge, the rhythmic ring of metal on metal competing with the crackling of the fire. He glanced up as she entered, nodding once in acknowledgement. "You're early," he observed. "I'm eager to learn," Clara replied simply. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. First rule of the forge: respect the fire. "Come here." For the next hour, Jack methodically demonstrated the fundamentals, maintaining the fire, judging heat by color, the weight and balance of different hammers, the properties of various metals. His massive hands moved with surprising delicacy as he selected tools and shaped a simple nail from a piece of iron. "Your turn," he said finally, handing her a smaller hammer. "Same piece. Follow the same steps." Clara hefted the hammer, surprised by its weight. As she struck the heated metal, the impact jolted up her arm, and the blow landed off-center. "Steady," Jack corrected, moving behind her to adjust her grip. The warmth of his presence was distracting. "Control comes from here." He tapped her. "Shoulder, not just your arm. Again." The morning passed in a series of awkward attempts and patient corrections. By noon, Clara had produced something that might, with generous interpretation, be called a nail. "Not terrible," Jack assessed, examining her work. "Better than most first efforts." "But still terrible," Clara said wryly, flexing her sore fingers. "Everything's terrible in the beginning. That's why most people quit." He set her misshapen nail alongside his perfectly straight one. "The difference between a blacksmith and someone who tried blacksmithing is whether you come back tomorrow." They broke for lunch, sharing coffee and bread on a rough wooden bench outside the forge. Clara was surprised when Jack didn't retreat into his usual silence, instead asking about her progress with the cooperative purchasing. "The first orders went out last week," she reported. "We should start seeing deliveries by month's end. And Garrett's plow parts. Shipped yesterday. He should have them by Wednesday." Jack nodded approvingly. "You've turned into quite the diplomat. Must serve you well working with everyone's accounts. Speaking of which, I meant to ask, your own accounting system needs attention. I noticed some discrepancies when reviewing the cooperative orders." "I manage." "Barely," Clara said bluntly. "When's the last time you actually collected on the Weatherby account, or followed up on that equipment repair for the Johnson farm?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Money's tight all around. People pay when they can. And you go hungry because you're too proud to insist on fair payment," Clara challenged. "That's not nobility, Mr. Morrison. It's poor business sense." "Maybe I'm not in this business. Then what are you in it for?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop herself. Jack stared into his coffee for a long moment. "Someone's got to keep the forge running. When the blacksmith leaves, that's when a town truly dies." "And you've appointed yourself Silver Creek's guardian angel?" "More like its stubborn ghost," Jack said with unexpected humor. "Too mean to move. On too proud to let go." Before Clara could respond, they were interrupted by the approach of hoofbeats. A rider pulled up, young, probably mid-20s, with the lean build of someone who spent long hours in the saddle. "Morrison," he called out. "Got a horse here, needs new shoes. Lost 2 coming through the passes, and I'm heading north to Wyoming. Territory. Name's Jack," the blacksmith replied, standing. "Let's have a look." As Jack examined the horse's hooves, Clara studied the young man. His clothes were well made but worn, his horse-quality stock, despite its missing shoes. When he pulled out a leather purse to count coins, she noticed his hands, smooth, uncalloused. "That'll be $2 for the shoeing," Jack said, straightening. The rider counted carefully. "I only got $1.50 on me. Rest is tied up in supplies for the winter spread." Clara saw Jack's shoulders tense, preparing to accept partial payment as he always did. Before he could speak, she stepped forward. "I couldn't help but notice your saddle work," she said to the rider. "That's quality leather crafting. Did you make it yourself?" "My brother did," the rider replied, confused by the change of topic. "He's got a workshop back in Denver. Custom work? Yeah, takes orders by mail these days." Clara glanced meaningfully at Jack, then back to the rider. "What if we traded services instead of cash? Mr. Morrison here needs a new apron for forge work. The leather he's been using is cracked and dangerous for someone working with molten metal." Jack's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he remained silent as Clara continued. "Your brother's workshop could craft a proper smithing apron, heavy leather, reinforced where needed. That's specialty work. I'd estimate its value at $3, maybe more." The rider brightened immediately. "I could send measurements to Denver, have him make it up, ship it back here in a couple weeks." "Perfect. So if we say $3 for the apron, that covers your shoeing, plus gives you 50 cents credit toward future work." The young man extended his hand eagerly. "Deal! That's more than fair." As Jack shoed the horse, Clara caught him glancing her way several times, his expression thoughtful. After the rider departed, promising to send his brother's measurements and address, Jack finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that. You need a proper apron. That one's held together more by habit than leather." "It was more than that, and you know it." Clara met his gaze squarely. "You're too soft with your pricing, Mr. Morrison. That boy had money. Good clothes, quality horse, silver buttons on his vest. He could afford full payment. Maybe, maybe not. And maybe you use poverty as an excuse to avoid dealing with the business side of your business." Jack's blue eyes flashed with something between anger and surprise. "Careful, Miss Whitfield. You're venturing into territory you don't understand. I understand that running a forge isn't charity work, no matter how noble your intentions." Clara stood her ground, despite the intimidating presence of his crossed arms and hardened expression. "And I understand that if you want to keep this town's heart beating, you need to keep your own business alive." They stared at each other for several moments, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Finally, Jack's posture relaxed, slightly. "You're not wrong," he admitted grudgingly. "Anna always said I was too soft when it came to collecting." It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife by name, and Clara felt the significance of the moment. "She sounds like a practical woman." She was. Kept our books, managed supplies, negotiated with suppliers, made me a better businessman, despite myself. "May I ask what happened?" Ida mentioned pneumonia. Jack's expression tightened, but he didn't shut down the conversation entirely. "Winter of '87. Harsh one. Silver Creek was isolated for weeks when the passes snowed shut. No doctor, no medicines. I should have taken her to Cheyenne when she first got sick. You couldn't have known. I could have tried." His voice was flat, matter of fact, but Clara heard the pain beneath. "Instead, I kept working, telling myself she'd get better, that spring would come early. It didn't." Clara touched his arm lightly, a gesture of sympathy rather than comfort. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be smarter than me." Jack picked up his hammer, signaling the conversation's end. "Now, if you're done psychoanalyzing my business practices, we've got work to do." The afternoon passed differently than the morning. Jack was more forthcoming with instruction, explaining not just the how, but the why of various techniques. Clara found herself absorbing information rapidly, her natural precision serving her well in the details-oriented craft. By closing time, she had successfully forged 3 passable nails and helped Jack complete a complex repair on a farmer's plough blade. Her hands were blistered, her back ached, and her clothes were permanently stained with soot, but she felt a deep satisfaction she hadn't experienced since her teaching days. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked as Jack banked the fire for the night. "Unless you've had enough of your first day as a blacksmith." "Not even close," Clara smiled, flexing her sore fingers. "Though I might invest in some salve for my hands." "Drugstore's closed, but Ida keeps a good supply of remedies. Tell her I sent you." Jack hesitated, then added, "You did well today, Miss Whitfield." "Clara," she corrected, "if we're going to be working together daily, formality seems excessive." Something shifted in his expression at the sound of his name on her lips. Surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of something more comfortable than their previous wariness. "Clara," he agreed, "get some rest. Tomorrow we will tackle horseshoes." That evening, Clara discovered that Ida had prepared a special supper in her honor. Roast chicken with vegetables, fresh bread, and actual pie for dessert. Several of the boarding house residents had gathered to celebrate her new position, including young Ethan Patterson, whose mother, Clara, had helped with the store accounts. "Is it true you made Jack Morrison give you a job?" Ethan asked eagerly. "Nobody's ever worked at the forge before." "I didn't make him do anything," Clara replied, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "I simply showed him I was capable of learning." "My ma says you're changing things all over town," Ethan continued, "making grown folks think different about doing business." "Ethan," Mrs. Patterson warned gently, "let Miss Whitfield eat her supper. It's—" "All right," Clara assured her, "and he's not entirely wrong, though I'd say we're all changing things together." As the evening progressed, Clara found herself the center of attention in a way that was both flattering and slightly overwhelming. When the conversation turned to her cooperative purchasing plan and its potential for expanding trade relationships, she realized something had shifted fundamentally in her standing within the community. Later, as she soaked her blistered hands in warm water mixed with Ida's herbal remedy, Clara reflected on how quickly her situation had transformed. Just weeks ago, she'd been a desperate woman stranded in a dying town. Now, she was an integral part of multiple business relationships, learning a traditionally male trade and somehow positioned as a catalyst for community change. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Ida entered with fresh bandages for her hands. "How was your first day as a blacksmith's apprentice?" "Challenging. Exhausting. Wonderful," Clara admitted, holding out her hands for Ida's ministrations. "And working with Jack?" "Surprisingly. Tolerable," Clara said carefully. Ida smiled knowingly as she wrapped Clara's hands. "He's been different these past weeks. Since you arrived, really. More engaged with people, less likely to retreat into his solitary brooding. Perhaps he's just tired of my meddling. Perhaps he's realizing that meddling and caring aren't so different." Ida finished with the bandages and sat back to study Clara's face. "You know, Anna was a meddler too, always pushing Jack to be better, to do more, to open himself to possibilities. Not trying to replace anyone," Clara said quickly. "Of course not, but maybe it's time for both of you to stop living in the past and start building something new." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the forge. Clara looked up from her practice work to see a woman dismounting from a buggy, elegant despite her frontier dress, with silver-streaked brown hair and sharp, assessing eyes. "Well," the woman said, surveying the scene, "so you're the infamous Miss Whitfield I've been hearing about?" Jack set down his tools, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Walters, what brings you to Silver Creek?" "Curiosity," she replied bluntly. "My husband's men returned with fascinating reports about a cooperative purchasing scheme that somehow extracted 2 months' worth of back payments in a single week. I wanted to meet the woman who accomplished what our best collectors couldn't. Clara wiped her sooty hands on her apron and stepped forward. Mrs. Walters, I hope your husband was satisfied with the resolution of Mr. Briggs' account. Indeed, which brings me to my proposition. The woman's sharp gaze moved between Clara and Jack. My husband's banking interests extend across 3 territories. He's always looking for capable people to manage frontier accounts, particularly those with demonstrated ability to work with difficult situations. I'm quite content with my current position, Clara said carefully. Multiple positions, from what I understand. Bookkeeper, cooperative organizer, and now blacksmith's apprentice. Quite the collection of responsibilities for a woman stranded in a dying town. Silver Creek is hardly dying, Jack interrupted, his voice colder than Clara had ever heard it. And Miss Whitfield's employment situation is not up for discussion. Mrs. Walters' eyebrows rose at the territorial response. I merely came to offer employment, Mr. Morrison, no offense intended. None taken, Clara intervened smoothly. But I'm afraid I must decline. You see, I'm discovering that sometimes the most rewarding work comes from the most unexpected places. She met Jack's gaze as she spoke, noting the subtle relaxation in his shoulders. Well, Mrs. Walters said, preparing to leave, should you reconsider, my husband has offices in Cheyenne and Denver. The offer stands. After she departed, Jack and Clara worked in comfortable silence for several minutes before he spoke. You didn't have to turn her down so quickly. That was a significant opportunity, was it? Clara selected a piece of iron for her next practice piece. Leaving Silver Creek to count other people's money in some distant city? I've had enough of running toward promises that turn out to be empty. And this isn't empty? Jack gestured around the cluttered forge. Learning a dying trade in a ghost town? Clara met his gaze directly. This feels real. Real work. Real challenges. Real community. Real possibility. For a moment something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or a shared recognition of the unusual partnership they were building. Real blisters, Jack added with rare humor, glancing at her bandaged hands. Those too, Clara laughed, but I'm beginning to think they're worth it. As October progressed into November, Clara's skills developed rapidly. Under Jack's patient instruction, she mastered basic techniques and began tackling more complex projects. More importantly, she implemented systematic changes to the forge's operations, better inventory management, clearer pricing structures, and regular account reconciliations. The cooperative purchasing program continued to expand, with orders now coming from as far as 40 miles east. Clara spent her mornings at the forge, afternoons managing accounts and orders, and evenings planning the next day's work. It was exhausting but deeply satisfying. One crisp November afternoon, as she helped Jack shoe a particularly temperamental mare, Clara noticed his hands guiding hers through the delicate process of fitting the shoe. Like this, he murmured, his larger hands covering hers. Feel how the metal wants to settle. The mare shifted, and Jack's arms came around Clara to steady both her and the horse's leg. For a moment, they were pressed together, his solid warmth at her back, his breath warm against her ear. Got it? He asked, and Clara realized she'd stopped listening to his instructions entirely. Yes, she managed, though she wasn't sure what she was agreeing to anymore. When the mare was properly shod and Jack stepped back, the forge suddenly felt colder. Clara busied herself with cleaning tools, acutely aware of every movement he made as he prepared to close for the day. Clara? Jack's voice was softer than usual. Yes? The harvest dance is coming up. End of November tradition. Most folks use it as a chance to celebrate surviving another season. That sounds nice, Clara replied, wondering where this conversation was leading. Would you... Jack paused, running a hand through his hair in an uncharacteristically awkward gesture. That is, I thought perhaps you might want to attend with me. Clara turned to face him, surprised to see actual uncertainty in his usually confident expression. "As friends?" she asked, though her heart was beating faster than the question warranted. "As whatever you're comfortable with," Jack replied carefully. "I know you didn't come to Silver Creek looking for complications, and Lord knows I haven't been easy to work with, but these past weeks have been the best thing to happen to me in a very long time," Clara finished honestly. Relief flickered across Jack's features. "Mine too. Then yes, I'd like to attend the harvest dance with you, as friends who are open to possibilities." Jack's slow smile transformed his entire face. "Possibilities? I can work with that." As Clara walked back to the boarding house that evening, she found herself humming a tune she hadn't thought of since childhood. Silver Creek stretched around her, its empty buildings still in need of repair, its businesses still struggling to survive. But somehow, the dying town no longer looked quite so hopeless. Maybe it was the cooperative purchasing bringing new vigor to local trade. Maybe it was her growing skill as a blacksmith giving her purpose and independence. Maybe it was simply the first frost making everything sparkle with temporary magic. Or maybe, Clara admitted to herself as she climbed the steps to Ida's porch, it was the promise in Jack Morrison's eyes and the unexpected warmth of finding connection in the most unlikely places. The first snowflakes of winter began falling on Silver Creek the morning after Jack's invitation to the harvest dance, but they were soon forgotten in the face of an unexpected crisis. Clara was at the forge, attempting to replicate a complex bracket design, when Tom Bradley burst through the door. "Jack, Clara, there's trouble at Briggs's store." Clara set down her hammer immediately, noting the panic in the rancher's voice. Jack was already reaching for his coat. "What kind of trouble?" Jack demanded. "The Prescott gang. They rode in this morning claiming someone in town cheated them on a cattle deal. Now they're tearing up the store, looking for money. The Prescott gang." Clara had heard whispers about them during her weeks in Silver Creek. Former miners turned to robbery when the silver played out, known for their brutal methods and disregard for law. The nearest sheriff was 3 days, right away in Cheyenne. "How many?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the calmness in her voice. 4, maybe 5, Tom replied. "They got poor Sam pinned down behind the counter. Say they won't leave till they get the money from that cattle." "Deal." Jack was already moving toward the door. "Stay here, Clara, this isn't—" "Don't!" Clara cut him off, grabbing her own coat. "I'm coming with you." "These aren't angry ranchers or difficult customers," Jack protested. "These are dangerous men, and Sam is my employer and my friend. I'm coming." Something in her tone must have convinced him because Jack didn't argue further. The three of them hurried down Main Street, gathering a small group of townspeople along the way. Through the store windows, Clara could see the chaos inside. Shelves overturned, merchandise scattered across the floor, and the unmistakable figures of armed men demanding something from a cowering Sam. Ida Henderson had positioned herself across the street. Several other women clustered around her. "They're looking for Jeremiah Watts," she called softly as they approached. "Claim he cheated them on a herd sale in Laramie, and now they think the money's hidden somewhere in town." "Is Jeremiah even here?" Clara whispered. "Left for Denver yesterday," Jack replied grimly. "Which means this is about intimidating whoever they can find." The store's door suddenly banged open, and a man stumbled out. Not one of the gang, but young Billy Prescott, one of Sam's regular customers. Blood dripped from a split lip. "You've got 2 hours to produce Jeremiah Watts, or $500, he called out, his voice shaking. "Those are their terms." Clara's mind raced. $500 was more money than Silver Creek saw in 6 months of normal business. But she'd spent weeks organizing accounts, tracking debts, managing the cooperative purchases. "Jack," she said quietly, an idea forming. "I might have a solution." "Clara, no. Whatever you're thinking—" "The cooperative. Orders?" she interrupted. "The consolidated purchases we've been managing. There's nearly $600 in goods arriving tomorrow on the supply wagons from Cheyenne. Jack's eyes widened as he grasped her meaning. You want to intercept the wagons? I want to redirect them. If we can convince the gang that Silver Creek has valuable merchandise incoming, goods they can actually see and take, they might accept that instead of terrorizing everyone for cash that doesn't exist. And bankrupt the entire cooperative in the process, Tom Bradley pointed out. Or save Sam's life and preserve what's left of our community, Clara countered. We can reorder. We can rebuild inventory. We can't bring people back from the dead. Before anyone could respond, another shout came from inside the store. 1 hour, 50 minutes. Jack studied Clara's face for a long moment, then made his decision. Tom, ride out and find those supply wagons. Tell them to circle around and approach from the North Road. We want the gang to see them coming. But, Jack, do it. Clara, you're with me. We're going to buy some time. Clara watched Jack stride purposefully toward the store, his shoulders squared despite the danger. She hurried to catch up, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. The scene inside Briggs' general store was worse than it had appeared from outside. 2 of the gang members, rough men with wild beards and wilder eyes, had Sam pressed against a wall, a knife at his throat. The other 2 were methodically destroying merchandise, searching for hidden money. We're here to negotiate, Jack announced loudly, causing all 4 men to turn. Well, well, said the apparent leader, a scarred man with greying hair and dead eyes. Jack Morrison. Heard you were still hanging on in this ghost town. Still here, Dutch, Jack replied calmly, and still interested in reasonable solutions to problems. Reasonable? Dutch laughed harshly. Watts stole $500 from us. That's beyond reasonable. Watts isn't here, Clara interjected, stepping forward despite Jack's warning. Glance. But the money is. Every eye in the room focused on her. Dutch's gaze was particularly unsettling, calculating and cruel. Is that so, little lady? And where might this money be? In merchandise, Clara said steadily. 6 supply wagons are arriving within the hour, filled with goods worth more than what you're owed. Tools, weapons, ammunition, blankets, preserved food, items worth actual cash, anywhere between here and Denver. You trying to trade stolen cattle money for store goods? I'm trying to offer you tangible value instead of empty threats and terrorized shopkeepers, Clara responded. You can spend the next 2 days searching Silver Creek for cash that isn't here, or you can take merchantable goods that you can sell anywhere in the territory. Dutch studied her for a long moment, then glanced at his men. Clara could see them calculating, weighing the certainty of goods against the uncertainty of finding hidden money. And why would you make such an offer? Dutch asked suspiciously. What's Silver Creek to you? It's my home, Clara said simply. These are my friends, my community, and I've worked too hard building something here to watch it destroyed over a misunderstanding. Building what? One of the gang members scoffed. This town's been dying for years. Dying, maybe, but not dead, Clara countered, and not without a fight left in it. Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching wagon wheels echoed from the North Road. Tom Bradley had found the supply train. Through the store windows, everyone could see the line of covered wagons approaching, 6 of them just as Clara had promised, heavy with goods and supplies for the cooperative purchase. Dutch moved to the window, his gang gathering behind him. Those wagons you're talking about? Every one of them, Clara confirmed, filled with exactly what I described. The gang leader turned back to face the room, his expression thoughtful. You're either very brave or very stupid, Miss Whitfield, Clara supplied, and probably a bit of both. Despite the tension, several people in the room, including Sam, managed nervous laughs. Very well, Miss Whitfield, we'll inspect these wagons. But if this is some trick— No tricks, Jack interjected, firmly. Just an honest trade, goods for peace. As the gang members filed out to examine the wagons, Clara felt Jack's hand briefly touch her elbow, a gesture of support that sent warmth through her despite the cold fear still coursing through her veins. That was incredibly reckless, he murmured. That was incredibly necessary, Clara corrected. Outside, the gang spent nearly 20 minutes examining the wagons, opening crates, testing tools, inspecting ammunition. Clara watched through the window as Dutch conferred with his men, noting their growing interest in the quality merchandise. Finally, Dutch returned to the store. "The goods are acceptable," he announced. "We'll take 3 wagons, our choice. And consider your debt to Mr. Watts settled." "3?" Clara protested. "That's nearly half the value." "Clara," Jack warned softly. "3 wagons," she agreed reluctantly, "and you leave Silver Creek immediately. No more searching, no more threats. This settles everything." Dutch nodded slowly. "Agreed, though I must say you got more spine than most men I know, Miss Whitfield." "Don't confuse desperation with courage," Clara replied coolly. Within 30 minutes, the Prescott gang was loading their chosen wagons and preparing to leave. As the last of them mounted up, Dutch paused beside the store entrance. "You might want to reconsider staying in Silver Creek," he called to Clara. "Woman with your negotiating skills could do well in larger towns." "I'm exactly where I want to be," Clara responded. As the gang rode out of town, collective relief swept through the gathered townspeople. Sam emerged from behind his counter, his hands shaking with residual fear. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, you saved everything." "We all saved everything," Clara corrected. "Tom found the wagons, Jack backed my play, the entire community stood together." "But you," Ida interrupted, stepping forward, "you risked everything, the cooperative, your own safety." "Sometimes you have to risk everything to save anything," Clara said quietly, the weight of what had just happened finally settling on her shoulders. Jack moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "You did good, Clara." "Scary." "Good. I was terrified," she admitted. "You didn't show it. That's because I had you there to intimidate anyone who tried to call my bluff." Their eyes met and held, and Clara realized their relationship had shifted irrevocably. She'd risked not just her own future, but all of theirs, and Jack had trusted her judgment completely. "The harvest dance," Jack said suddenly. "After what just happened, I think this town could use some celebration." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. The loss of 3 wagons' worth of merchandise was significant, but compared to the loss of life that might have occurred— "Miss Whitfield," said a voice from the edge of the crowd. Clara turned to see young Billy Prescott, his lips still swollen from the earlier altercation. "I wanted to thank you and to tell you something." "What's that, Billy?" "The Prescotts weren't just looking for money. They were planning to take over Silver Creek, use it as a base for their operations. That cattle deal with Jeremiah was just an excuse." The crowd fell silent, digesting this information. "But after watching you today," Billy continued, "seeing how this community stands together, Dutch told his men it wasn't worth the trouble. Said any town that produces women like you probably has men worth avoiding too." "That's quite a compliment," Clara said dryly, "in a backhanded way." "What Billy's trying to say," Ida interjected, "is that you didn't just save us today. You showed everyone, including ourselves, what Silver Creek could be when we stand together." Over the next few days, as Silver Creek processed the events and prepared for the harvest dance, Clara found herself the subject of conversations she couldn't quite escape. Stories of her negotiation with the Prescott gang grew in the telling, until she was credited with everything from single-handedly disarming knife-wielding outlaws to negotiating international peace treaties. "They're making you into some kind of legend," Jack observed one afternoon as they worked together at the forge. "I just did what needed doing," Clara protested. "Which is exactly what legends do," Jack replied with a rare grin. "Though I noticed you left out the part where your voice was shaking." "My voice was not shaking. Your whole body was shaking. You just had the good sense to keep moving anyway." Clara turned to face him, suddenly serious. Jack, about the dance. If you've changed your mind, no, but I need to know. Are you asking me because you feel obligated? Because I helped save the town? Because I've been wanting to ask you for weeks and was too much of a coward to do it, Jack interrupted. The whole town-saving thing just gave me the excuse I needed. Clara stared at him, processing this admission. Really? Really? Jack set down his tools and moved closer. Clara, I haven't felt connected to anyone since Anna died. I thought I was done with all that. But you've changed something in me. The way you see possibility where others see defeat. The way you care about this dying town and its stubborn people. Stubborn blacksmiths included. Especially stubborn blacksmiths. Jack's voice dropped lower, more intimate. I know this isn't what you planned when you came to Silver Creek, and I know I'm not exactly... Clara silenced him by placing her hand against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. Jack Morrison, for a man who works with fire every day, you can be remarkably obtuse about reading heat when it's right in front of you. His eyes widened slightly, then crinkled with genuine amusement. Is that so? That's so. Clara stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. I didn't come to Silver Creek looking for you, but sometimes the best discoveries are the ones we don't go searching for. Sometimes they are, Jack agreed, his hands coming up to frame her face. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Really looked, acknowledging what had been building between them through weeks of shared work, shared challenges, shared purpose. Then Jack leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, as though he was afraid she might change her mind. But Clara had faced down armed outlaws. She certainly wasn't going to retreat. And from this, she pressed closer, her arms winding around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both were slightly breathless. Well, Jack said, his voice rougher than usual, I guess that settles the question about the dance. I guess it does, Clara agreed, trying to hide her smile and failing completely. Though now I have a new problem, Jack mused. What's that? I'll have to figure out how to dance with you without making a fool of myself in front of the entire town. Clara laughed, the sound bright and unconstrained in the cluttered forge. After everything we've been through, you're worried about dancing. You clearly haven't seen me dance. No, but I've seen you handle white-hot metal with precision. I think you'll manage a simple waltz. As evening approached and they closed the forge together, Clara reflected on how completely her life had transformed. She'd come to Silver Creek as a desperate woman fleeing false promises, only to discover real ones in the most unexpected places. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, restocking the cooperative inventory, managing the fallout from the gang, confrontation, preparing for winter's full arrival. But tonight she had a dance to look forward to, a community that had welcomed her, work that fulfilled her, and a man who saw her strength rather than her vulnerabilities. As she walked back to the boarding house, Jack fell into step beside her. He didn't take her hand. That would be too public a display for Silver Creek's sensibilities, but his presence was warm and solid beside her. "Clara," he said as they reached Ida's front steps. "Yes? Thank you." "For what?" "For not getting on that coach the day after you arrived, for staying, for fighting for this town when most sensible people would have run." Clara smiled up at him. "Thank you for seeing possibilities in stubborn Eastern ladies who don't know the first thing about blacksmithing. I'm beginning to think that was the smartest thing I've done in 5 years." As Clara climbed the steps to the boarding house, she heard Jack's footsteps continuing down the street toward his own small house near the forge. Tomorrow they would return to their usual routines, work at the forge, managing accounts, preparing for the dance that would celebrate Silver Creek's stubborn survival. But tonight, she would fall asleep thinking about the feel of Jack's hands in her hair, the taste of forge smoke on his lips, and the startling realization that sometimes the best journeys end exactly where we're meant to be, even if it's nowhere near where we thought we were going. The morning of the harvest dance dawned crisp and clear, with the first real snow of winter blanketing Silver Creek in pristine white. Clara woke early, not from nervousness about the evening's event, but from the sound of hammering coming from the direction of the forge. She dressed quickly and stepped out into the cold air, her breath visible in small puffs. The sight that greeted her made her stop in her tracks. The entire town seemed alive with activity. Men were hanging lanterns from posts along Main Street, women were carrying covered dishes toward the community hall, and children were building elaborate snow structures between the buildings. But what caught her attention was the transformed storefront next to the church. Fresh paint gleamed on the windows, and a new sign was being mounted above the door: Silver Creek Cooperative Trading Post. "Surprise!" came Jack's voice from behind her. She turned to find him approaching, snowflakes caught in his dark hair, and a satisfied smile on his face. "What is all this?" Clara asked, gesturing toward the storefront. "What happens when a town decides to stop dying and start living again?" Jack replied. "We started working on it 3 days ago, right after the Prescott business. Sam's moving his stock here next week. Bigger space, better location, and it'll serve as the permanent headquarters for your cooperative purchasing plan." "My plan?" "Our plan," Jack corrected gently. "Turns out, watching someone risk everything to save a town has a way of inspiring others to risk a little something too." Clara moved closer to examine the new building, noting the careful attention to detail: new hardware on the doors, reinforced shelving visible through the windows, even decorative ironwork that clearly bore Jack's distinctive style. "Did you make all this hardware yourself?" "Had some help. Turns out, when you announce a dance to celebrate not getting robbed to death, people find motivation to finish projects quickly." His humor was typical, but Clara detected something else beneath it. A lightness she hadn't seen since the day she'd first walked into his forge. The day passed in a blur of preparations. Clara spent her morning helping the women arrange the community hall for the evening's festivities, and her afternoon working alongside Jack to complete last-minute ironwork for the new trading post. By late afternoon, Silver Creek had transformed into something she barely recognized, a town that looked like it had a future. As evening approached, Clara faced her wardrobe with some anxiety. Her practical work clothes wouldn't suffice for the dance, but her limited travel wardrobe offered few options. She was contemplating her least worn day dress when Ida knocked at her door. "I thought you might need this," Ida said. Holding out a garment wrapped in tissue paper, Clara unwrapped it to reveal a deep green silk dress with intricate beadwork along the bodice. The style was current, the craftsmanship evident. "Ida, I couldn't. Possibly it was mine from when I was about your age. Brought it with me when I married my Carl, planning to wear it for fancy occasions that rarely came to Silver Creek." Ida's expression was wistful. "I'd be honored if you'd wear it tonight." "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, running her fingers over the smooth fabric. "But are you certain? My dear, after what you've done for this town, lending you a dress is hardly a grand gesture. Besides," Ida added, with a knowing smile, "green always brings out the blue in certain blacksmiths' eyes." As Clara dressed for the evening, she could hear music drifting from the community hall, a fiddle, joined soon by a guitar, and someone's attempt at a piano that had clearly seen better days. The sounds were imperfect but joyful, filling the winter air with warmth and promise. The reflection in her small mirror showed a woman Clara hardly recognized. The borrowed dress fit perfectly, its color complementing her auburn hair and making her skin glow. But more than the external transformation, she saw confidence in her posture, purpose in her expression. This was the woman she'd become, no longer the desperate mail-order bride, but someone who had found her place through her own choices and actions. A soft knock at her door interrupted her reverie. "Yes? It's Jack. I'm here to collect you for the dance." Clara opened the door to find Jack standing in the hallway, dressed in what was clearly his best black suit. His hair was still damp from washing, his beard neatly trimmed, and his blue eyes widened appreciatively as he took in her appearance. "You look—" He paused, searching for words. "I don't think I have adequate words." "Try presentable," Clara suggested with a smile. "That's not even close," Jack replied seriously. "Beautiful doesn't cover it either, though it's closer." Clara felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Morrison. It's been a while since I've had occasion to dress up for anyone." Jack offered his arm. "Shall we?" The community hall was ablaze with light and life when they arrived. What had once been a gathering place that saw maybe a dozen people at town meetings was now filled with nearly 60 residents, including ranchers and farmers who had traveled from outlying areas specifically for the celebration. The room had been transformed with evergreen boughs, handmade paper decorations, and dozens of candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Someone had even managed to find bolts of ribbon to create festive streamers across the ceiling. "Clara! Jack!" Sam Briggs called out, approaching with 2 glasses of punch. "You both look magnificent, and Clara, that dress, it's perfect." As they accepted the punch, Clara noticed how different Sam looked from the nervous shopkeeper she'd first met. There was confidence in his bearing now, pride in his voice as he gestured around the decorated hall. "Hard to believe this is the same place where we were discussing foreclosure just months ago," he observed. "A lot can change in a few months," Clara agreed, glancing meaningfully at Jack. The music struck up again, a lively reel that had people forming into sets for dancing. Jack set down his punch with obvious determination. "Well, Miss Whitfield, I believe I promised you a dance." "That you did," Clara replied, placing her hand in his. As they moved through the figures of the dance, Clara was surprised to discover that Jack had understated his abilities. He wasn't graceful exactly. His frame was too large, his movements too economical for true elegance, but he was steady and sure, leading her through the steps with quiet competence. "You've been practicing," she accused when the dance brought them close enough for conversation. "Maybe a little," he admitted, "in my kitchen, at night, when nobody could see." The image of this large, taciturn man practicing dance steps alone in his kitchen made Clara laugh with genuine delight. "I would have paid good money to witness that." "I'm sure you would have," Jack replied dryly, "right after using it for blackmail material." As the dance ended and a slower waltz began, Jack pulled her closer. This was different from their working relationship, different even from the stolen kiss at the forge. This was public declaration, visible to everyone in Silver Creek, that something significant had changed between them. "People are staring," Clara murmured as they swayed to the gentle melody. "Let them," Jack replied. "I've spent 5 years hiding from people's attention. I'm done with that." "And what brought about this dramatic change?" "You," he said simply. "You showed me that hiding doesn't protect you from loss. It just keeps you from finding anything worth losing." The profundity of the statement struck Clara silent for a moment. As they continued dancing, she noticed other couples around them. Tom Bradley and his wife, their movements easy with years of practice. Sam Briggs dancing awkwardly but enthusiastically with Mrs. Patterson. Even Ida Henderson waltzing gracefully with the widowed farmer from the Weatherby place. But more than the individual couples, Clara noticed the community as a whole. Conversations were animated, laughter was frequent, and there was an energy in the room that she'd never experienced during her months in Silver Creek. This wasn't the resigned socialization of people marking time until their town died. This was celebration of survival, acknowledgement of shared victory, affirmation of collective will to continue. "Jack," she said softly, "look around. Really look." He followed her gaze, taking in the transformed hall and transformed people. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to genuine wonder. "When did this happen?" "I think it's been happening gradually," Clara replied. "The cooperative purchasing, the community response to the Prescott threat, people working together on the new trading post. But tonight feels like confirmation. Silver Creek isn't dying anymore." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to all of us," Clara corrected. "I just helped us see what was already here." As the waltz ended, the fiddler announced a break, and many people moved toward the refreshment tables. Jack led Clara to a quieter corner of the hall, near windows that overlooked the snow-covered street. "Clara," he began, then paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I need to tell you something about why I really stayed in Silver Creek." She waited, sensing the importance of the moment. "When Anna died, I made a promise to her. She'd said she didn't want me to leave Silver Creek, that she believed it had a future if enough people were willing to fight for it. I stayed to honor that promise, but over time, I was just going through the motions. I'd given up believing she was right." Jack looked out at the winter night, his reflection ghost-like in the window. "Then you arrived, and you did something I hadn't seen in years. You created change, instead of just enduring circumstances. You made me remember why Anna believed in this place, why she thought it was worth saving." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "Jack, I'm not saying Anna sent you here," he continued with a slight smile. "I don't believe in that kind of providence. But I do believe that somehow you ended up being exactly what Silver Creek needed, what I needed." He turned to face her directly, taking both her hands in his larger ones. "I love you, Clara Whitfield. I didn't expect to love anyone again, certainly didn't plan on it. But watching you face down outlaws, reorganize half the town's businesses, master blacksmithing like you were born to it." He shook his head in amazement. "How could I not fall in love with you?" The declaration hung in the air between them, precious and fraught with possibility. Clara studied his face, this man who had initially rejected her plea for work, who had become her teacher, her partner. And now, "I love you too," she said quietly but clearly. "I came to Silver Creek running from one future and found one I never could have imagined. A better one, because it's real and it's earned and it's ours." "Ours," Jack repeated, as though testing the word. "I like the sound of that." Before either could say more, they were interrupted by the ringing of spoons against glasses. That universal call for attention at celebrations. "Quiet down, everyone." Sam Briggs was standing on a chair near the front of the hall, looking both pleased and slightly nervous. "I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge what we're really celebrating tonight." The hall gradually quieted, all faces turning toward the improvised rostrum. "When I started having troubles with the bank this fall, I thought it was just my problem. My failing business, my debt, my responsibility. Then Clara Whitfield stepped off that stagecoach and reminded us that in a place like Silver Creek, nobody's problems are just their own." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. What she started with cooperative purchasing, what she did during the Prescott crisis, the way she's helped all of us see opportunities instead of obstacles, it's changed everything. But more than that, she's reminded us that we're not just individuals trying to survive alone. We're a community. Sam raised his glass of punch, so I propose a toast. To Clara Whitfield, who saved Silver Creek not with grand gestures, but with practical solutions and stubborn hope. And to Jack Morrison, who had the sense to see her value even when he tried to hide it. Laughter and applause filled the hall. As glasses were raised, Clara felt herself blushing furiously, but Jack's hand found hers and squeezed gently. "Speech!" someone called out. "Yes, speech from Clara!" Others joined in. Clara found herself gently urged toward the front of the hall, Jack's supportive presence at her back. She looked out at faces that had become familiar, people who had transformed from mere acquaintances to genuine community in just a few short months. "I'm not much for speeches," she began, then paused as another wave of applause and encouragement washed over her. "When I arrived in Silver Creek, I thought I was looking for security, a husband, a home, stability. What I found instead was possibility." She gestured around the decorated hall. "This room, this town, all of you, you've taught me that home isn't something you find or something you're given. It's something you build, together, one decision at a time." Her gaze found Jack's in the crowd. "And sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that scare us most, like taking a chance on a dying town, or trusting a stubborn blacksmith, or believing that small actions can create large changes." Clara raised her own glass. "So here's my toast. To Silver Creek, which refused to die quietly. To all of you who refuse to give up, and to unexpected beginnings, which often turn out to be the most perfect endings." The cheer that went up was deafening. As Clara made her way back through the crowd, she was stopped repeatedly by people wanting to thank her, to share their own stories of transformation, to express hope for the town's future. When she finally reached Jack again, the band had struck up another lively tune. But instead of leading her back to the dance floor, he guided her toward the door. "Where are we going?" she asked, surprised. "Outside. Just for a moment. I have something for you." The night air was sharp and clean after the warmth of the hall. Fresh snow continued to fall in gentle flakes, creating a magical atmosphere as they stepped onto the boardwalk. Jack reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wrapped package. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, trying to find the right moment." Clara opened the wrapping to reveal a small iron rose. Its petals, delicately formed and bearing the unmistakable marks of hand-forging. It was exquisite. "Jack, it's beautiful. Did you make this?" "Every petal," he confirmed. "Started it the day after we kissed. Wasn't sure what it meant or where we were heading, but I knew I wanted to make something that would last longer than flowers." Clara turned the iron rose in her hands, marveling at the craftsmanship. Each petal was slightly different, creating a natural, organic feel, despite the unyielding material. "It's perfect," she said softly, "but then you always were better with actions than words." "I have some words too," Jack said, his voice suddenly serious. "If you're interested in hearing them." "Always." Jack took her hands, the iron rose pressed safely between them. "Clara, these past months have changed everything I thought I knew about my life, about what's possible in a place like Silver Creek. You've shown me that love doesn't just happen once and disappear, that communities aren't just groups of people enduring hardship together. That hope isn't foolishness when it's backed by hard work and shared purpose." He paused, gathered his thoughts. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, not because protocol demands it, not because the town expects it, but because I can't imagine building a future without you. Because when I think about Silver Creek's tomorrow, you're in every version I see." Clara felt the weight of the moment, the significance of the choice before her. This wasn't the desperate acceptance of a mail-order arrangement. This was a conscious decision to bind her life to another's, to commit to building something lasting in a place that had once seemed like the edge of the world. "Yes," she said, the word clear and strong in the winter air. "Yes, Jack Morrison, I will marry you." The kiss that followed was different from their first, less tentative, more certain, full of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, both were dusted with fresh snow, but neither seemed to notice the cold. "Should we go back inside and tell everyone?" Clara asked, though she made no move to release Jack's hands. "They probably already know," Jack replied, with amusement. Small town, big windows, but yes, we should go share our news properly. As they turned to re-enter the hall, Clara caught sight of their reflection in the window. Two figures, close together, with the warm glow of celebration. Behind them and the clean promise of snow all around. It struck her that this moment, this perfect convergence of choice and chance, struggle and triumph, individual decision and community support, was exactly what she had been searching for without knowing it. The great doors of the community all swung open to welcome them back, and Silver Creek celebrated long into the winter night. Plans were made and dreams were shared. Tom Bradley announced his intention to expand his ranch come spring. Sam revealed that the new trading post would include a small lending library. Even the Weatherby farm, which had been threatening bankruptcy, declared new hope with the cooperative. Purchasing arrangements and promised to try again, but perhaps most significantly, as Clara danced once more with Jack, she noticed something that hadn't been present earlier. Children, not just the handful she'd seen around town, but families who had quietly returned in recent weeks, drawn by rumors of Silver Creek's revival. The next generation, ready to inherit whatever future the adults could build. "Look," she murmured to Jack, gesturing toward a corner where several children were engaged in an elaborate building project with wooden blocks. "Think they're planning the town's expansion already?" Jack asked with rare humor. "Probably redesigning your forge for better efficiency." "Our forge," Jack corrected. "Everything's ours now, remember?" Clara leaned against his solid warmth as they swayed to the music. "I remember, and I like the sound of that." As midnight approached and families began gathering their sleepy children, the celebration gradually wound down, but the energy of the evening lingered in exchanged glances, firm handshakes, and quiet conversations about plans for spring. Clara and Jack were among the last to leave, helping to blow out candles and restore the hall to some semblance of order. As they stepped out into a night that had finally stopped snowing, Silver Creek stretched before them, transformed by recent storms into something clean and new. "Do you think we'll remember tonight?" Clara asked as they walked slowly toward Ida's boarding house. "In 10 years, 20 years, will we remember exactly how it felt?" "Some of it will fade," Jack admitted. "The specific details, the way the punch tasted, who wore what. But the important parts?" He stopped and turned to face her. "The important parts we'll carry with us always. The moment we decided to stop being afraid. The night Silver Creek chose hope over surrender. The evening I asked you to marry me and you said yes." "All the important parts," Clara agreed. They resumed walking, their footsteps the only sound in the quiet street. Here and there, lights still, glowed behind windows, but most of Silver Creek had already settled in for the night. "Clara," Jack said as they reached the boarding house steps. "Yes? Thank you for getting off that stagecoach, for staying, for arguing with me when I tried to turn you away, for seeing what this place could be when everyone else was busy watching it die." Clara smiled up at him. This man she would marry, in this town she had helped save, surrounded by people who had become family through choice rather than circumstance. "Thank you for giving me something worth staying for." Their final kiss of the evening was soft and sweet, full of promises yet to be kept and dreams yet to be realized. Then Jack waited at the gate until Clara had safely climbed the steps and disappeared inside, ever the gentleman, despite the changes wrought by time and circumstance. As Clara prepared for bed that night, she could hear Silver Creek settling into quiet slumber around her. Somewhere a dog barked, a distant train whistle echoed across the plains. From the forge, she caught the faint scent of ash and metal that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. She folded the borrowed green dress carefully, knowing she would always associate it with this night of transformation. Then she sat at the small desk by her window and pulled out paper to begin a letter to her cousin in Chicago, the only family she had left. Dear Martin, she wrote, you'll be surprised to hear from me after so long, and even more surprised to learn that I'm writing from Silver Creek, Wyoming, where I've found something I wasn't looking for, but apparently desperately needed. Outside her window, snow had begun falling again, gentle and persistent, covering Silver Creek in a fresh blanket of possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities. There would be a wedding to plan, a forge to run, a trading post to manage, and a community to nurture. But tonight, Clara Whitfield, soon to be Clara Morrison, fell asleep in a dying town that had chosen to live, beside the man she loved, surrounded by the family she'd found, dreaming of all the beautiful, unexpected ways that endings can become beginnings. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.